Good evening, and let us get started. I am Paul Valliere. I'm a professor of religion here at Butler, and on behalf of all my colleagues at the university, it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the fifth and last of our series of seminars on religion and reconciliation in global perspective. We're very grateful to our collaborators in this project, particularly the Desmond Tutu Center, the director, the Reverend Dr. Alan Busak, also the administrative director who is here in the audience, Wasima Ali, and Anne Anger in the is religion and reconciliation between Russia and Ukraine. Is reconciliation possible? We will follow our usual format, which is that our keynote speaker will talk for about 40 minutes. We have two respondents. Each of them will talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have the balance of our 2 hours for questions and responses from you. We will conclude our proceedings promptly at 9 o'clock. Our second respondent this evening is Father Cyril Havarun. Father Cyril was born and educated in Kiev, studied theology at Kiev Theological Academy and the University of Athens in Greece, earned his PhD in patristics at the University of Durham in England, and was ordained a priest of the Russian Orthodox Church in 2006. He's served his church in several important capacities, including as president of the Department of External Church Relations of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate, and in Kiev as a member of several theological and ecclesiastical commissions in Moscow. He has also represented the Russian Orthodox Church in a number of formal ecumenical dialogues. Father Cyril has already had extensive teaching and research experience outside of Russia and Ukraine. He has spent most of the last 3 years as a research fellow at Yale Divinity School in New Haven, and recently has moved to Sweden to take up teaching and administrative duties at St. Ignatius Theological Academy near Stockholm. Father Cyril's academic expertise falls in the fields of ecclesiology, public theology, and patristics. Please welcome Father Cyril Havarun.
Thank you. Well, in order to save some time, I will say just briefly, I'm really, really privileged to be here at this place and to address such a distant audience, and I will go straight to the topic of Constantine's presentation. I'd like to start with my reflection with what happened a week ago. A week ago, I visited in Boston a distinguished American sociologist of religion, Peter Berger, and we had a discussion with this great man on a number of topics, including Ukraine. He was not really much aware. Well, he had a common knowledge about what is going on in Ukraine, but he wasn't aware about every detail. But his judgment about the character of what is Ukraine, I think it is important. He said to me that, my impression about Ukraine is that it is very diverse, and Ukraine enjoys its diversity. I would completely subscribe to this, and I think he was just hitting the point, the very important point of what is Ukraine and what is going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is diverse, and diverse religiously, culturally, in terms of language, in terms of mentality. It's really a country of many cultures. And when speaking about reconciliation, I think a Ukrainian recipe of reconciliation would be through acknowledging and enjoying this diversity. This is the way for us as Ukrainians to reconcile with the country and with the people who actually want to kill us. Not to stick to our own pain, not to stick to not to victimize ourselves, to present ourselves as victims, but to present ourselves as something, as a people who enjoys diversity and who enjoys multiplicity. Speaking about this, having spoken about this, I'd say that what we need to reconcile in Ukraine, there are two things which need to be reconciled somehow in Ukraine. One thing is the reconciliation with the recent past. The revolution of dignity happened because of really outrageous policies of the regime of Yanukovych. It was a classical totalitarian regime, a classical dictatorship. You know, you read about those dictatorships in the textbooks. We had it in Ukraine, and people just protested against that regime. It was not a cultural, it was not any kind of a protest of identities. No, it was a protest against the nonsense, against the violation of everything which is human, which is normal, which is common sense by that regime, and a lot of Ukrainians participated in that regime. They supported that regime, they indulged that regime, and now they live among us. And the problem of reconciliation is now how to reconcile with those people. So how to reconcile with the people from that regime. Especially it is a difficult task for those who went to the Maidan and who actually suffered, who were tortured, who were wounded, or whose members of whose families were killed there. So it is one reconciliation. The second reconciliation that we need to address, we face, is the reconciliation between the two parts of the war. The war in Ukraine has alienated people, not only Ukrainians against Russians or Russians against Ukrainians, but also people in the country. There are two irreconcilable narratives which have been produced by the recent events. The one narrative is the narrative of the Maidan. The Maidan has articulated a very powerful narrative of dignity, of freedom. I find this narrative very, very similar to and touching the narrative of the American political culture and American identity. All those things that are important for the American people: freedom, dignity, solidarity. We live through that kind of experience, and we share this kind of narrative. Then a different narrative was created, was articulated mostly by the Russian propaganda, and it was a narrative of fascism, of oppression of the Russian-speaking people, of the Orthodox Church, or whatever. This narrative is really artificial. It does not correspond to the reality, and it essentially covers exactly the things that it articulates. It covers murders of the Protestant pastors and their families in the east of Ukraine. It covers persecutions against those who in Crimea who try to speak Ukrainian, for instance, or Tatar language, and so forth. So these two narratives, even though if we declare the narrative of the Russian aggression as a false narrative, it does exist. It's a reality, and we somehow need to deal with it. We somehow need to reconcile it with the new Ukrainian narrative of the Maidan. So these two walls, the wall between the people of the Maidan and the people who supported the regime of Yanukovych, and the wall which was raised by the Russian aggression, these are two walls that separate the people in Ukraine. And I believe these walls are very similar to the walls that other countries lived they experienced it. Particularly, I would like to stick to the idea of similarity of Ukraine and South Africa. I believe that those two walls are very similar to the wall of apartheid somehow. And I find a striking similarity between Ukraine and South Africa in many regards. One of those regards is the role of the churches. Well, as you know, in South Africa, apartheid was enhanced with an important contribution from some churches like NGK, the Nederduitse Gereformeerde Kerk, which contributed largely to apartheid. And at the same time, apartheid was pulled down, the wall of apartheid was pulled down with the assistance, again, of the churches, but other churches, in particular the South African Council of Churches, presided at the time by Desmond Tutu. So the role of the churches in South Africa was important, was very instrumental in both building the wall of apartheid and in pulling down the wall of apartheid. The same happened in Ukraine. Some Ukrainian churches contributed largely to building the walls, and some other churches, they try to pull down those walls, and they need probably more effort to do this. There is also another another feature which is similar between Ukraine and South Africa. Exactly this idea of forgiving. I think it's unthinkable to. I cannot imagine reconciliation in Ukraine without forgiving. Well, the way how the antagonizing parts can forgive each other is, I think we need to learn how to forgive from the experience of South Africa. I had a chance recently, a month ago or so, to address a number of the members of the Ukrainian parliament concerning this. It was a meeting organized by the Greek Catholic Church on the premises of the Ukrainian parliament, and around 40 members of the Ukrainian parliament showed up, and we had a chance to speak with them about how the churches could contribute to reconciliation in Ukraine. And I exactly suggested the idea of harvesting from the experience of South Africa and from the experience of Desmond Tutu particularly, and how this experience can work in Ukraine. I think this idea was received well, and hopefully it will bring fruits. There is another interesting thing, similarity between South Africa and Ukraine. In South Africa, Desmond Tutu has introduced the concept of Ubuntu. It's a South African concept which is difficult to translate, actually. Desmond Tutu himself tried several times to explain what Ubuntu means. And one of the close meanings of this concept is dignity. So it's all about what the revolution of dignity was. So essentially, we can say that the revolution of dignity, the Maidan, was the revolution of Ubuntu. And this concept may help a lot, I believe, to heal the wounds and to reconcile the people in Ukraine. In overcoming the apartheid in South Africa, very instrumental was the role of the international Christian community. We know how important was and instrumental was the WCC, the World Council of Churches, how important was the input from other Christian denominations in condemning and in overcoming apartheid. I think the churches nowadays, the international Christian communities, need to do more regarding Ukraine. It's really surprising and striking how silent are the churches about the conflict in Ukraine. The political organizations, the UN, even the UN, sometimes, not really decisive organizations. They say more, and they do more than the churches do. Interestingly, that the international organizations and national governments, they tend to make moral judgments about what is going on in Ukraine, because the essence of the conflict in Ukraine has a very clear moral dimension. It's about truth, it's about justice, it's about violence, it's about war, all those moral issues. And the churches don't speak about in those terms, even though they are expected to speak in moral terms. And instead of the churches, the national governments and the international organizations speak in moral terms. One of the strongest judgments of the Ukrainian situation was articulated quite recently, a couple of months ago, in Phanar in Constantinople, during the meeting of Pope Francis with the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. And they produced a statement. It was a historical meeting. It was a very good, important meeting. And they produced a statement where they included two sentences concerning Ukraine. They said, "We also remember all the people who experienced the sufferings of war. In particular, we pray for peace in Ukraine, a country of ancient Christian tradition, while we call upon all parties involved to pursue the path of dialogue and of respect for international law in order to bring an end to the conflict and allow all Christians to live in harmony." This is the strongest message of the Christian churches so far. And you see no moral judgment, just an appeal to the international law. They still express those churches themselves in legal terms, something that the national governments should do, but the role of the churches is to speak in moral terms, and they don't. And this is really striking. Moreover, I would say that the Roman Catholic Church, which is the Vatican, and Pope Francis, he has personal connections with Ukraine. He was personally connected with some Ukrainian Greek Catholic bishops in Argentina. And he was believed to be very close to Ukraine, and a part of his church, the Greek Catholic Church, is suffering in Ukraine, actually, in the east of the country. And Konstantin, he mentioned the example of Father Tikhon Kulbaka, whom I know personally, and how he suffered. He's now very ill after he was detained. And regardless of this, Pope Francis quite astonishingly said that this is a fratricide. The fraternal conflict, the internal civil conflict in Ukraine, which repeats actually the Russian propaganda, and it was accepted really with anger in Ukraine, even by the Greek Catholic bishops. It was really disappointing. The World Council of Churches, which issues statements on any occasion in the world, keeps silent on Ukraine. This is another surprise. The most probably disappointing position is by our fellow Orthodox churches. The only statement by an Orthodox church concerning Ukraine was by the Greek Orthodox Church in Athens, where the members of the Synod came together in August last year, and they decided to send a letter to Patriarch Kirill and ask President Putin to lift embargo on Greek olives. That was it. So that is the only Orthodox reaction to the conflict in Ukraine. So this is really disturbing. This is really disappointing. The lack of voices from the churches. Without those voices, we cannot overcome the crisis in Ukraine, as South Africa probably was not able to overcome apartheid without support of the international Christian community. And I'd like to call upon you to also to consider raising your voice regarding the Ukrainian conflict. So that's what I'd like to say. I don't want to spend more time, and I'd like to, maybe all of us, we would like to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Cyril. You've heard three very different but mutually supportive voices tonight. I can't stress too much how much expertise you have on the subject that we're talking about tonight, just right here at the table. So I invite your questions and comments directed at the audience. Please, where are our microphones? Right. Let's start with the gentleman right in the middle.
First of all, thank you for three very illuminating presentations. I'd like to hear a bit more about the Russian Orthodox theology behind their support for the war and your perspective on how that hinders reconciliation among the various Christian communities.
Well, it is, that this is one of the most painful issues. So painful. You see, is there a separation between church and state? Or do we have the story of the national identity of Russia against the enemy? I do believe that in whatever is being said, that issue, that the propaganda or the identity, that the sacred memory of the war, Stalin opened the church. You see, okay, I'm going to go back a little bit, if it is possible. Stalin knew that he will not win the war. And then what happened was, all the churches were open, because the churches were closed. They went to the Gulag, took the priests whom they didn't kill out of the Gulag and put them with the army. And the priests blessed the boys, and the generals gave them vodka so they wouldn't be afraid, and they went to fight. And 20 million were dead, but there was a victory. Because Stalin realized that Russia simply, as the ideology of the Soviet Union, is not going to survive. But the memory of the church is so deep that when you are in trouble, you have to open up that particular layer. So what we had a church that worked with the state. Not all the priests, because there is always a difference between the mother who takes the child to the church to learn how to do icons and to put the candles and to see the beauty of that spirit of the church, and a very, very complex politics of the church. So after Putin came to power, there was, I would call, and I'm sorry, I'm probably more verbal than I should, there was an unholy alliance between the church and Putin's government. And the difficulty, Orthodox Church wants to be united. And that is partially why, when Father Kirill here took one of the most difficult issues, why the churches are quiet. And the churches are quiet because one always believes if we keep the reconciliation, we keep peace. Maybe it's not provident right now to put the real questions on the table. And so, when Christ says the Son of Man doesn't know where to put his head, something of this, I believe, is happening right now. That's mine.
Father Cyril, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would completely agree with this judgment, and I would say that well, the Russian theology as the church is somehow divided, and there are voices that certainly and clearly condemn what is going on and this unholy alliance. There are voices who support this kind of partnership, and essentially, I would present this dilemma, I would present this division as a division between the theology being turned into ideology and theology that resists ideology. So that is essentially the core of the conflict between two parts of the Russian theology.
Thanks. We have a question over here.
I have three comments, and the last two someone could reiterate upon it. The first comment is I've been fortunate enough to be involved in several different ways in Russia. And in the year 2014, I would just like to make the comment that a young man did an extremely nice act of kindness, and I just said to him, "Spasibo," and he looked me in the eye and he said, "We are trying to show the world that we are nice people," and that made a nice impression. The two comments that I'd like to make, one of them, when I was in 2008 in Moscow, that was when the uprising in Chechen was going on. And talk about propaganda. When I was in the States, and then when I went to Russia, totally two different stories. The people in Moscow, there was footage on TV that just mocked, basically, what was going on in the West. And also the Brits that lived in Moscow and worked. Same thing with the Americans. They couldn't understand it, why the West, the bottom line is, who was right? Whose propaganda was better? I don't know. Maybe one of you can answer that. The other thing is, back to propaganda, the stories about crime, correct me if I'm wrong, was Crimea always a part of Russia, or is that?
We'll get to that. Finish your comment.
Okay.
We've got to keep moving here.
Okay. In regards to Crimea, is it true or false that after World War II, I guess Stalin, during a poker game, lost, and he didn't have the money, so he gave Crimea away?
Yeah. I think that's a little embellished.
Is that a myth?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for those comments. Over on the right, we have somebody.
Welcome.
Sure. Who'd like to make a comment?
We will take two questions and then we will work with that, I promise.
Wait for the microphone, please. Right behind you.
My comment is, how can there be reconciliation if Putin and the Russian textbooks deny Ukrainian history through the cave in Rus? I think you know exactly what I'm saying.
Which one?
Let's start with that question.
Yeah.
You see, I don't know how far into the history we're going to go, but the problem is we cannot return to there are constant lies. Lies are part right now of the textbooks, they're a part of it. The reality, however, is that there are a lot of intermarriages. There are a lot of Russians who are living in Ukraine. What are you going to do, throw them away? Your mother is Russian, your father is Ukrainian. Your mother is Russian, Ukrainian, your father is Russian. There is what you said, that you saw a young gentleman. I, for example, know the wonderful side. I would not want anyone to think here that I hate my country. I know Russian kindness deeply. I know Russian kindness. I know I know how people rest. I know my attitude to literature, my attitude to culture, my attitude to friendship, all of this that makes my life so full, it was based on the Russian culture. However, right now, there is, so I want to tell you that what you saw, we're not saying they're evil people. What the problem, however, is that the ideology right now that they've accepted, or it is accepted for now, that they accepted right now is such that it deeply threatens the possibility of peace or reconciliation. And we need to explain to the West what is going on. And for example, you know, there are many books that say lost in translation. I never liked that. I thought we survive in translation. We need to explain what happens. But the problem is, if you plead for people to listen to you, you lose them. Somehow we need to find a path to explain that the bell tolls for all of us. Something deeply unjust is taking place. But how to awaken the churches, how to awaken the world, how to explain it exactly. And we are working against very, very technically brilliant propaganda. That is true. But nobody says that people are evil. That is not true at all. That is I would like to say, maybe the best of me is that I was born there.
May I answer the first question concerning whose propaganda is right? Well, I think, yes, you are quite aware that never before the anti-American feelings were so high in Russia as they are now. And the Russians tend to put all the blame on the Americans. The irony of the situation is that never before America has done so little to support Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that is my question, my answer.
Yes, I actually would like to upload that.
We have a couple of questions over here, please. The gentleman in the maroon sweater. Microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Dobry večer, Vitaim u vas. One question I have is, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I think one reason why Ukraine was weakened was when Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union fell apart. And I'm embarrassed to say that our former Senator Luru was one of the architects of that program. And the other comment I want to make is, how's the best way to counter this propaganda? Because in reality, if you look at the history of World War II, Stalin was begging the United States to enter the war. He was begging Roosevelt to enter the war because I think he realized that the Russians cannot win the war, and I think Russia owes a lot of its gratitude to the United States for entering the war and saving Russia. And the other point I want to make is that this attacking Ukraine as being fascist. Who was the original collaborator with Hitler? It was Stalin. So, I mean, how do you counter that kind of propaganda, and how do you get that back into the Russian history books so the Russian people know that?
Father Cyril, you want to comment on
Short
that?
answer, I would agree with all your comments. They are rather comments and not questions, and I would completely support them. Yeah, I'd say concerning the nukes, that indeed a very bad message has been sent to the world with the situation around Ukraine, which gave up the third largest arsenal of nukes in the world. And there was a Budapest memorandum signed in 1997 when the US, the UK, and Russia served as endorsers of that step of Ukraine. And the message which is being sent now is very clear. If you don't have nukes, you cannot protect yourself, right? That is the first message. The second message is, if you have nukes, you can do whatever you want, and no one does anything to you.
There's a question up in the lounge.
Hi. So Cyril said something about how America, it's not super involved in Ukraine right now. And I've seen on the news that like countries like UK and the US are concerned with Russia's role in the conflict. So I was just wondering, do you guys think that outside countries should get involved with this conflict, or do you think that it should be resolved within Russia and Ukraine?
My position is, here I will all say, my position is Ukraine needs as much help as possible. And I would like to add, a friend of mine ran from Gulag many, many years ago. And my father asked him, he said, "Where did you run?" Because the person was arrested and put back and got another 10 years. He said, the question not where to, but where from. Ukraine right now wants to become a diverse society. It is a diverse society. We cannot say everybody is a holy person there, but it wants to break into civic normality of life. And the problem is, it is not free to do so, because if Ukraine is allowed to do that, then we're going to have Maidan in Moscow too. And that's the reason. That would be me. So if I were advising President Obama, I would say Ukraine needs help.
There's another question up there.
All right. First, I'd like to apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Dr. Glaskov Korigan, you made a comment about how there are some people in Russia who their devotion to the state is a little bit greater than to the religion. And I was wondering if there's any ideas on how these people can become part of the healing process, which has been initiated by the Orthodox Church, how they can be brought in.
You're asking me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I believe that even life, things were left simply to human beings, things would not be great. I believe, and I know that it is true, that when there is an example of courage and when there is an example of truth, it moves people. Because of that, I do not believe that the lie ultimately wins. The question is, at what price? At what price? And how much suffering will it bring? So I believe, in my experience of life, that miracles happen in life. We cannot, that's why I spoke about Saint Avila. But right now, the situation is very, very difficult.
Somewhere up there. Who has a question? Yes, please.
Hi. So my question is going to be regarding the late social media claims over Putin's disappearance. So many of the social media sources suggest Putin maybe his disappearance may be due to health or possibly a paternity leave. However, considering the timing of the last murder of Boris Nemtsov, these suggestions seem rather far-fetched. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were towards Putin's disappearance, and was it as social media claims, or do you believe it was more of like a power move from his stance?
I think Father Cyril has some things to say on that.
Well, just briefly again. Well, I think Putin wants that his disappearance to be discussed, and he wants this kind of questions to be asked all the time. He's very much theatrical, so he reappeared recently, and as nothing happened to him. I think it's not important whether he appears or he disappears. What is important is what he will do. And again, it's not even important what he does or he wants or what he thinks. It's more important what the Russian people think. And the problem is larger than Putin. I think the problem is the Russian psyche, which has been affected badly, I think, about what is going on. And the thing about Ukraine is, well, Ukraine is not, it's important, for us as Ukrainians, it's a value in itself. But for the international community, I mean, I think Ukraine is important because it's a key to the kingdom of Putin. The role of Ukraine is very, very simple. If Ukraine wins, the rest of the world will win. If Ukraine loses the war, the rest of the world will lose the war. So that's why Ukraine is instrumental. I'm sorry to say this. I don't like to see Ukraine as Ukrainian, to see Ukraine as an instrument. But, well, in terms of real politics, it is instrumental to changes in Russia. And if Ukraine fails, loses, then, well, the consequences will be really bad.
I would like.
Do you want to add to that? Go ahead, Lena.
I would like to add to that. Putin has several major issues. One issue is Russian economy totally depends upon the oil prices. On the oil prices, you know, the Russian economy, basically. So what we have economy is in great danger. And that affects the population. He needs to make some decisions, but he's avoiding that. So there is always a theater. Either he disappears for 10 days, but you can only play this game for so long. It could be something significant. It could be part of the political theater. He has to be at the center stage. What happened with Nemtsov, you know, there was an expression that was used about Russian politics, maybe it's true about every politics, it's the battle under the carpet. Something moves on that carpet, you know, and who's up and who's down and what is happening. But the real issues are not being spoken about. And the real issue is that the Russian economy is in great trouble. And are they going to create what's going to happen? And instead, everybody is discussing, is he sick? Is he dying? Is he having a baby? And the media is playing that game too. And we are surviving for a little bit longer in that theater. But at a certain point, one would have to deal with the issues.
We have a question up here.
Talked a lot about how the churches have been reluctant to make moral statements. Do you think that if the churches did make moral statements, that would be enough to fight against the propaganda, or would more action still be necessary?
That's an excellent question. Let's, Lena, translate that for Konstantin. See if Konstantin can comment on that.
Yeah, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, repeat the question, please. A very good question.
My question was, we've talked a lot about how the churches have been a little reluctant to make any moral statements about the current conflict. So my question was that if the churches would speak out and make a moral statement about the conflict going on, would that be enough to fight against the propaganda, or would more action still be necessary?
Which churches are speaking?
The Orthodox churches.
Orthodox churches in
in other
Ukraine?
words, Father Cyril said in his remarks that commented that the churches have, by and large, not been making moral statements about the Ukrainian situation. The question is, if they did make moral statements, would that make any difference? Would that affect anything? And Kostya, address that. Speak right into the mic and address that question. Would it make a difference?
Absolutely. I think it's really necessary to express the solidarity. And for example, Ukrainian Orthodox Church from Canada, recently the leader, Metropolitan Yuri, visited Kiev, and I have several dialogue with the representative of this Ukrainian Church of Canada, and I think this strong position and the effort to express this solidarity is really great need. We feel this. I think it's also a very concrete expression of the open society and the possibility to establish in our common tool and common reflection about the possibility of truth and reconciliation commission, for example. And also, I think it's very important to keep in mind the profound division inside the Russian society. For example, I strongly recommend you to discover, to see this Russian film Leviathan. I think it's about, okay, it was nominated this year for an Oscar, and it shows profound difference between the Russia on one hand, imprisons seekers of justice and truth, and on the other hand, Russia that suffers persecution. And I think for different churches, for example, OCA here, American Church in America, Orthodox Church in America, or different churches, it's very important to notice, to see the inner problems in Russia, also in Ukraine, and to find better the personalities, the institution, the centers, the university, the think tanks to develop the content. So it's the very moment for the networking, for develop the future possibility to overcome this war, also in field of information and propaganda. Thanks.
Father Cyril, you raised that point. Do you want to make a comment on it?
Well, I would be maybe a bit more skeptical about the power of statements. Yes, I was critical in my comments about lack of the statements, but statements are the least that the churches have to do. You know, all the international organizations they speak up about Ukraine, and national governments they express their deep concerns, and you know all those deep concerns became anecdotal in Ukraine. Whatever happens, and a government of Germany or Belgium expresses its concern, well, people laugh at that. You know, well, okay, you are concerned. What else? So what? So when we speak about the declarations from the churches, always the question raises, so what? Yes, certainly the churches need to speak up, and the churches also need to, at the same time, the churches also need to do something. And I believe that the example of South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission there, is very helpful for us to understand how the machinery of reconciliation can work in other contexts. I believe that reconciliation it's a very hard work of human souls, but it's also a technical thing. It's a technique, and those techniques which have been elaborated in other contexts should be just applied to our situation, and the churches can be instrumental in that.
We've got some questions down here that have been up for quite a while. Let's get this fellow first, and then Haley Bauer.
All right, thank you. My arm was starting to hurt a little bit. I got to no. Okay, so as you said, Father Cyril, you said that it's you can't ignore the problem. The church can't ignore it, and they've made statements on the problem, so it's there. They know that it's there. And then from you, Dr. Elena, you said that it seems as if there's no separation between the church and the state in Russia. So does the church in Russia have intent? Do they have a reason for not standing out on these actions, for being one with the state?
Want to comment on that?
This is so sad. This is one of the saddest issues of Russian post-Soviet history. All right. First, I would like to say something. Whatever is happening in Ukraine, it's the Russia's war with Europe. It's not just Ukraine, and therefore, and against it's Russia's war. But right now, let's just look at Europe. So we are speaking about US, Russia, but there are also a lot of European countries and Eastern European countries. So it's not just about Ukraine. A lot of countries are involved, and therefore I believe there is hope in it. And those countries will speak because their own security is questioned. In Russia, what happened was, this is such a painful issue. I could just tell you something, and probably my friends might not even agree with me. During the Soviet time, the church, a great number of the church officials were also part of the secret police. And they used to tell who's going to be baptized. You don't think that in this apparatus of the church, they're going to let people just go to church. Now, that was the dark page of the church who suffered deeply after the revolution. I would like to leave at this point. I just would like to say what happened with that structure, how it operates. There is definitely story there, but I don't want just to tell bad stories. I just want to draw your attention to this.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that question. We really only have time for one more couple. Okay, two more questions. Briefly, please.
So then, because
right into the mic.
Sorry, the South African model of Truth and Reconciliation Commission was structured by the church. Is it then possible for in Ukraine for that to happen if the Orthodox Church is split?
Father Cyril, go ahead.
Well, very short answer, yes. Well, that's exactly my point as well, that the example of the churches, the constructive role contribution of the churches to the process of finding truth and reconciliation in South Africa could be very helpful in Ukraine, and we need to write on that experience.
Yeah. Julianne, last question. Right into the mic, please.
Okay. My question is, what is the most important thing ordinary American citizens can do to further the goals which you speak of for helping Ukraine and the Ukraine crisis?
Ordinary American citizens or ordinary Ukrainian citizens?
I guess here, how can we aid in this process?
Yeah.
How can people here
Yes, excellent question. Excellent. Because you're right that, okay, statements, etc., but today it's really the very moment of volunteer work. A lot of children of refugees in Kiev, in Kharkiv, all over Ukraine. And 30 years ago, it was very important movement. You remember maybe Children of Chernobyl. It was very important in United States, in Western Europe, and Ukraine. It was two generations were very sensible to this solidarity. And nowadays, every family, my family, family of all my colleagues in university and in whole civil society in Kiev, in Ukraine, is very much involved in this volunteer work. And I think maybe for the different churches all over the world, for civil society in America and in Europe, it's very important to find this partnership and networking for this concrete solidarity, because it's not only the question of this spring, it's really the question of nearest future. And thank you very much for this question, thinking, and real solidarity. Thanks.
And my answer will be very short. Write to your congressman.
We'll go to the real point.
Before we, Lena?
I would like to add to your question. I'm sorry I don't know your name, but after the Second World War, America fed Russia. It really looked after Russia to a great extent. So people born after the war remember that, or at least born during the war, and they remember when America. So that memory is not forgotten. Yeah. That with all the politics that operate, I just wanted to say that.
Before I thank our speakers, I have a couple of other words of thanks. First, I do want to thank all of you for coming out, not only this evening, but many of you to our series this year, starting in September on Religion and Reconciliation in Global Perspective. Thanks very much for being a great audience, engaging our also engaging speakers. Another word of thanks that really needs to be said here is to Marguerite Stanchu. Marguerite, stand up. People know who you are. Marguerite Stanchu is the Assistant Director of the Center for Faith and Vocation, and we'd be here a long time if I read the list of everything that she has done this year for this series, including the task of assembling our international panel tonight. Thank you very much, Marguerite, for everything that you've done. And to Konstantin Segoff, and to Elena Glazov-Korgan, and to Father Cyril Gavaroun, warm thanks for your discourse, for your insights, and you've got us thinking. Thank you very much. Join me.
If you don't mind, the gentleman here surrounding me asked me to say something. So I would like to thank one more person. Could I please? I'm going to go to the big microphone. I saw Paul Valier in Ukraine teaching the young Ukrainian students in Russian. He organized this event, and to organize this event together with Marguerite and this center, he moved the universe. I just want to thank him. Just wanted to say, the gentleman on my right and my left asked me also to say that.